Hi everybody. So I've had you guys start here with Columbus because you really can't study the creation of America without starting with Columbus. So everyone knows Christopher Columbus. Everyone knows the myth of the man. And I wanted you guys to read this primary source for two purposes really. One is I want you guys to see the man behind the myth. What we sort of attribute to him is not always the truth. But also, I wanted you guys to see and understand how we study a primary source like this, something written in Columbus's own hand, as a piece of literature. So, when we look at the first two letters, I wanted you guys to think about how the two letters compare, because they're two very different moments in history. The first letter comes from his triumphant discovery of what he considers to be America. And if you'll notice, there's a few things in here that you can think about. One is the narration. So the narration obviously is first-person narration. Because of that, there is a few key words we need to pay attention to. So, you'll notice the number of personal pronouns me and I in his first letter. It's really significant, the fact that he talks about himself repeatedly in the first person, saying things. He says the king and queen gave this land to me in the first paragraph, gave this opportunity to me. And then he also says something about how when they discovered these lands, no opposition rose against me. So this is not rose against the Spain or the king or the fleet. This is Columbus. So everything here is about Columbus. And if you'll notice, as he kind of continues on, flips it to the next page on page 36, Columbus, there's several interesting takes that he has on the culture and the people. And I want you guys to think about this, because when we get to other explorers, it's not going to be quite the same. So, Columbus, when he talks about the people of the land, he does not necessarily consider them to be full people. He really considers them to be more objects or part of the land. He says that on these islands, he found an infinity of small hamlets and people without number, but nothing of importance. That language is very significant. You see that he's completely discounting the native peoples as something to be ignored. No worries, it's no opposition. Basically, he's telling Ferdinand and Isabella, we've got this is our land, no worries. He also discusses the land. He describes the land as this sort of mythical, magical land of milk and honey, if you will. But he talks about how many harbors there are. It's beyond comparison against any of the others in Christendom that he knows. So he's saying, this land I have found for you is better than any other kingdom's land. Trust me, Ferdinand and Isabella. You made a good investment. And he says it's good and large rivers, which is marvelous. And he says, Española in the end. Española is a marvel. So I wanted you guys to notice how he talks about that, and then compare it to the second letter, which is when he's under arrest. As you saw in his biography, he was arrested and taken back to Spain in absolute shame when the entire system of the colonies that he had built by leaving other people in charge and then coming back and forth completely collapsed. So the native people had enough and basically rebelled. The colonies collapsed as they were. And if you'll notice, the language, the tone is entirely different in the second text. So it begins with, of Española, we're comparing Española is a marvel. Now we say, of Española, I never think without weeping. So the tone is entirely different from the beginning of this letter. And he's writing Ferdinand and Isabella here for mercy, trying to get them to have mercy on him while he's under arrest. So he says, you'll notice that the language is very different. The language is not about Columbus, it's about Ferdinand and Isabella and everybody else and how their mistakes have contributed to the fall of the colonies. So he says, for example, he talks about the destruction of the colonies in which everyone is an adept, so in which everyone has a hand. So he's trying to take the focus back off of him. And he says, for example, in this paragraph on page 37, he says that I came here to govern in your royal name. So it's no longer about Columbus. It's about doing it for the king and queen. So you notice the language is very placating. It's very supplicating. He even employs some sort of logical argument here. He says, the document that you signed, Ferdinand and Isabella, states this very fully on the bottom of paragraph 2. He says, there can be no delusion about all of this. everything of this, all of this demands justice, and he employs even a biblical allusion to try and support his argument. So just like you write an argument and you pull in experts to kind of support it, he's pulling in the Bible to try and support his argument. He says at the bottom of paragraph 3, he says, "It is well to give God that which is his due, and to Caesar that which belongs to him," which, as you can see in your book, this comes from Matthew 22:21. So he says all of this is based on the sentiment of justice. I deserve justice. So it's no longer about conquering and being the hero. It's about being fair to the man who did all of this for Ferdinand and Isabella. He says, "I have placed all of this under your royal and exalted, all these lands under your royal and exalted lordship." So notice the flowery language that we're getting here, and it's all about how wonderful the king and queen are and how merciful they are. And he says, "Who will believe that a poor foreigner could in such a place rise against your highnesses?" So he says, "How could you imagine that I am just a poor foreigner? I would ever rise up against you?" This is very, very different language from the man in the first letter. So it's really very fascinating to kind of study his transition and tone here. If you'll flip it over on the back of page 38, you'll see that he employs an emotional appeal as well. So he says, in the middle of this paragraph right here, see where my star is, he says, "I have wept for others, now heaven have mercy upon me, and may the earth weep for me." So this kind of over-the-top language is really quite masterful if you think about it. He's really quite good with words. So he says, in the end, "I wait for me whoever has charity, truth, and justice." These noble pillars of humanity have humanity for me, is what he's saying. And lastly, he entreats them to let him at least leave Spain and go on a pilgrimage. So go to a holy land where he can make reparations for his sins. So really, if you think about it, Columbus is just pulling out all the stops that he can to get himself out of jail. So I just wanted you guys to notice these different things. It's really, really fascinating to kind of study Columbus's transition within his own letters, and then to study transitions from Columbus to later explorers, as you're going to see with Cabeza de Vaca. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. You have a discussion board assignment to go ahead and do. So if you'll move down to the next thing, you'll see it has all the instructions as far as what you need to do. It's just like all your discussion boards so far. You guys are doing a great job, so if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hopefully you enjoyed Columbus.